regular meeting of the Minneapolis Police Conduct Oversight Commission will now begin.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Sparks. I am the Vice Chair of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and I'm going to call this meeting for April 12th, 2022 to order. As we begin, I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by members of the Commission and city staff as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D-021, due to the declared local public health emergency. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and is subject to the Minnesota open meeting law. Two remarks before we begin. One brief one is that it sounds like this might be the last virtual meeting that we have. It sounds like we're going to be transitioning to in-person meetings soon, and the clerk's office will be sending us some updated information on that, time and place, that kind of thing. I don't think it's all been figured out yet, but that's expected to most likely by May. It sounds like we'll be doing this in person. Second, I just wanted to make a brief remark regarding our chair's resignation. Chair Abigail Sarah served on this commission for a long time and was a good friend and partner and cohort to I think everybody here, and she resigned a little while ago, and I think speaking for all of us, we were sad to see her go. And so as far as leadership on the committee, it's down to just me as vice chair, but that will hopefully we'll get that squared away soon. So at this time, I would like to ask the clerk to please call the roll so we can verify a quorum for our meeting.
Commissioner Crockett.
Here.
Commissioner McGuire.
Here.
Commissioner Pineau.
Here.
Commissioner Sylvester. Vice Chair Sparks.
Present.
There are 4 members present.
Great, thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Next, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which has been posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Before we jump into the agenda, I would like to make a motion to amend the agenda to include an additional discussion item. I'm going to label it PCOC.
I'm listening
and
to
our
a
mission.
police oversight thing. Okay. A commission.
All right, so we're going to make a motion. I'll make a motion to add a discussion item, PCOC and our mission, to the discussion topics. I'd like to do it right after we do the election. So we'll jump right into that as our first discussion topic. Could I have a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Pineau. And could we call a roll for that, please?
Commissioner Crockett.
Aye.
Commissioner McGuire.
Muted, Commissioner McGuire.
Aye.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pineau.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sparks.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the election of a chair and vice chair. So I'm going.
Excuse me, Vice Chair Sparks.
Yes.
You took a roll to amend the agenda. You now need a roll call to accept the amended agenda and one for the minutes. And you could do the amended agenda and minutes combined if you would like.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, let's, Commissioner Pineau.
I move to accept the agenda as amended, as well as the minutes from the previous month.
A second.
Yeah, we need to call a roll for that.
Yes.
Okay, please call the roll.
Commissioner Crockett.
Aye.
Commissioner McGuire.
Aye.
Commissioner Pineau.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sparks.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
All right, looks like the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, Next item on our agenda is the election of a chair and vice chair. I guess looks like we'll turn the meeting over to Clerk Brock to conduct the election for chair and vice chair.
All right, I am Lisa Brock, the clerk for the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. First, we'll undertake the election of a new chair. Any commissioner may nominate a member, including themselves, to be considered for election to the chair position. Nominations do not require a second. After nominations have closed, each individual who has been nominated will be given a few minutes to explain why they would like to be considered for the position. When speeches have concluded, members may enter a question and answer period with the candidates before the vote is taken on the election of the officer. Are there any questions about this process? All right. The floor is now open to nominations for the position of chair. Are there any nominations for the position of chair?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner McGuire. I think you'd make a stupendous chair.
Are there any further nominations for chair? Are there any further nominations for chair? With no further nominations, I will close the nomination period and will now recognize Commissioner McGuire for a few brief comments.
Thank you, Vice Commissioner Sparks. I appreciate your nomination. I appreciate your confidence in me. I know I would never be able to step into the shoes of Commissioner Sarah and all the work she put in. And if I am chosen to be the chair, I hope that this is a work in progress together as we really determine what we can do as PCOC and try and push our commission into a direction where we can feel effective. We've kind of been, for lack of a better word, limping along, and for good reason. We've had people resign, and it's a detriment to our city in such a vital time, a time where we should really be able to make change and make progress. It's kind of been stagnant, and not just in the PCOC, in several areas. So I would ask that if I am made chair, that it is in a certain sense work as a team, because I value all of you and your experience and work as well.
At this point, we now open the floor to a brief Q&A if any commissioners would like to engage with the nominee. With that, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Pineau.
Commissioner McGuire, thank you very much for accepting this nomination. I appreciate your willingness to lead this commission, and I think that your last comment there of working together as a group is definitely going to be a salient one for the next few months for us. Would happy to help in any way I can as the senior commissioner here, but also as the chair of Audit Subcommittee. Anytime you need a hand there, just let me know. I know that's not a question, so I will end it in the classic phrase of, "Isn't that right, Commissioner McGuire?" And so it is now a question.
Thank you. That's a classic cross-examination strategy. So yes, that is right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Pineau.
Would any other commissioners like to participate in a Q&A? With that, we will proceed to the election of the commission chair. When I call your name, please respond with the name of the candidate of your choice to serve as chair. A majority is required to elect an officer. Commissioner Crockett.
I'd like to elect Commissioner McGuire.
Commissioner McGuire.
I will elect Commissioner McGuire myself.
Commissioner Pineau.
Again, for Commissioner McGuire.
And Vice Chair Sparks.
will vote for Commissioner McGuire.
Commissioner McGuire has 4 votes. Next, we will open the floor to nominations for the position of Vice Chair. Are there any nominations for the position of Vice Chair?
I would like to nominate Jordan Sparks to continue to maintain his role as Vice Chair.
Are there any further nominations for Vice Chair?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Pineau to also be a Vice Chair. I think he'd make a really good Vice Chair.
Point of information, there is only one Vice Chair role. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right.
Are there any further nominations for Vice Chair? With no further nominations, I will close the nomination period. We'll now recognize each nominee in order for a few brief comments. Vice Chair Sparks, you are up first.
I'll keep it real brief. It's been my pleasure and my honor to serve with the commission for as long as I have, coming up on 1.5 years, and it's been another pleasure and an honor to be the Vice Chair. I have to say that I do not have the capacity at this time to serve further as Vice Chair. Maybe I should have opened with that, but I couldn't accept the nomination right now. Although I do have full confidence in Commissioner Pineau to be a Vice Chair. I think that he's more than qualified and more than ready.
You're muted.
Oh, Commissioner Pineau, it's now your opportunity for a few brief comments.
Since Commissioner Sparks has rejected his nomination, totally understandable. I'm also concerned about my capacity, but since I'm the only remaining nominee, I'll accept it. I think everybody knows that like my main focus of being on here is to chair and help shepherd through our audits and evaluations as much as possible. I would like for that to continue to be my main focus, but if I can be of help to Chair McGuire in this process, then I will accept the nomination. You're muted again, Madam Clerk.
Oh, thank you. We will now open the floor to a brief Q&A so commissioners may engage with the nominee. If there is no desire for the Q&A, we will proceed to the election of the Commission Vice Chair. When I call your name, please respond with the name of the candidate of your choice to serve as Vice Chair. A majority is required to elect an officer. Commissioner Crockett.
I elect Commissioner Pineau.
Chair McGuire.
Commissioner Pineau.
Commissioner Pineau.
I will abstain. Thank you.
Commissioner Sylvester. I'm sorry, Commissioner Sparks.
I'll vote for Commissioner Pineau.
There are 3 votes for Commissioner Pineau and 1 abstention.
Thank you, everybody.
I will now turn the meeting over to Commissioner McGuire as Chair McGuire, and double check that you have a copy of the script available to you.
I do, and thank you very much. Okay. Our next item of business is an update on the PCOC appointments. Could the civil rights staff please provide us an update? Do we have anyone present that is able to provide an update or perhaps is on mute?
Hi, I'm so sorry. I have a time lag on my Teams. What was the question, Chair? I'm so sorry.
No problem. We were asking for an update on appointments to the PCOC.
Yes, so we did receive a few applications and we have some interviews coming within the next week and a half. And we will have another interview phase after the application pool closes. I believe it's April 15th.
Are there any questions or discussion for the commissioners on this topic?
Go first, Commissioner Sparks.
Oh, all right, thanks. Yes, Ms. Meany, I was curious about what I just want to make sure I understand the timeline for new commissioners coming on board. So in some interviews in the next week and a half, and then a second interview phase after that probably puts us, do you think, July to have people sworn in and appointed, or what are you thinking?
I spoke with Andrew a few days ago, and I believe that he had mentioned that it would be May. Middle to end of May. I'll have to follow up on with that again, but at least up until I believe it was Thursday that him and I spoke about this, that it would be mid-May.
Okay, so the earliest would be mid-May, meaning the next. So would those commissioners have they would have a training meeting, I suppose, after the swearing in, and then would they be joining us in the June meeting? Or they probably would miss the May meeting, right?
Right.
June meeting, or maybe July. What are you thinking?
I think it would be probably June. I would have to talk to see if there is a meeting that needs to be moved in order for an orientation to take place.
Okay, thank you.
I also have a question in full clarity. I am going to be one of those applicants. I'm re-upping, so just want people to know that this isn't for me and my information, but just generally because I've heard there's inconsistencies in the past regarding people on the panel. I know that there's meant to be certain types of city representation on these interview panels. Would you be able to tell us what representation is meant to be there and whether or not those representatives have planned and are going to be showing up to those interviews?
Sure. So myself, I will be in those interviews. Andrew, another member from his staff, someone from the clerk's office, I believe, and there is a potential from a staff member from the mayor's office. I'm not entirely sure who, and I can't verify if they have accepted or not. That was the plan, at least. Okay. But at least from our office, it was me, Andrew, and another staff.
Are there anyone representing MPD or City Council that will be in those interviews?
No one from MPD from that I'm aware of. At least I have not invited anyone from MPD.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's the only question I have.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Hearing no more questions, thank you, Ms. Amini, for the update. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So our next item of business is the discussion of case summaries on the Office of Police Conduct Review, that the Office of Police Conduct Review has posted to the city's website. Are there specific summaries we'd like to discuss? And I think I would like to open the discussion to how, or I would like to note as a point of discussion later, how we want to review these summaries, considering I was only able to review January and February summaries, but I want to open up to the other commissioners first, if there's anything specific they would like to discuss with the posted summaries. Okay, hearing nothing, I think maybe appropriate time to discuss more is a couple items down on our agenda, which is to, I guess it's not posted on the public agenda now that I'm looking at it, but it's unless there's an amended one that I don't see, that we were going to discuss the PCOC and its mission. So I would like to kind of fold that into that discussion. Yeah.
Chair McGuire,
Yeah.
that was an amendment, and
Okay.
I don't believe the agenda was amended to include that, and I don't believe it was specified where it would be on the agenda.
Okay.
So if you would like to put it to right now, that is at your discretion.
Thank you so much for your help. I think I would. So one of our items of business is to discuss the PCOC and our mission moving forward. And I think this is a pertinent discussion item, considering there's a change in case summaries. We're having issues with maintaining membership and, even just quorum of the PCOC. So with that, I'd like to open it to the commissioners if there's anything you'd like to discuss. And Commissioner Pineau has your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Commission, for bringing this up as an amendment to our agenda. This was the continued conversation from the Audit Subcommittee. This might as well serve as the majority of our report. When we get to that point, you'll see that it's very short because PCOC work has essentially stalled. And this has been for a number of reasons, the majority of which have been brought up in detail in the Audit Subcommittee, but the succinct version is we keep hitting roadblocks on either lack of authority within what is we understand to be our scope and authority as a commission, or a second point being lack of staff resources in order to achieve in a pragmatic way the duties that are charged to us. And I thought it would be best to bring this up as a discussion for the commission in its entirety, because what is our purpose if not to, implement and follow through with the duties that we have in our charter. And I think that it would be best, obviously this is kind of on the fly right now, but I think it would be best for us and with our new leadership to begin the process of this entire commission or reforming the ordinance subcommittee of this commission. We're small enough now, we might as well do it as a full group, but one way or another, taking an in-depth look at our ordinance that forms the PCOC, our powers, our duties, as well as our operating rules, and having a self-evaluation to look at how have we performed in the past 2 years, in my experience, in actually completing those duties. I'm concerned that this will be a very solemn, process, but I think it's a necessary one for us to grow and improve as a commission. And I I've heard from my colleagues yourselves that you feel similarly. And I think now is as good a time as any to stop the bleeding. You know, not to be too graphic with the terminology, but we need to right the ship, and we need to let the bodies that have given us this authority, the mayor and city council, know that we're struggling, and not only our plans internally to correct that within our own capacity, but being quite frank with what we see as limitations to follow through on those responsibilities that we have, and a fair evaluation of what we believe we need in order to achieve the mandates that they have for us. I know it's an undertaking, but I think at this point, because of the lack of work that we've been able to produce, that it's necessary. Yeah, that's the main topic of this. I do want to have a follow-up point regarding about staff resources, but I'll leave it there for now. If other colleagues want to have say in this conversation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pineau, for I think laying it out. At least for me, that's better than I could have put it in some of the frustrations. And so I think we're going to have further discussion, but I don't know if you already have proposals about how we first take those steps, but I do think maybe planning out a more directed discussion at one of our meetings and kind of treating the subcommittees as all of us right now is going to be part of that.
Yeah, I do have some ideas, some of which have been very plainly stated as needs from OPCR and the Civil Rights Department in the Audit Subcommittee as the reasons why we can't, get data. And a lot of this comes down to just we either don't know if we have the authority to get the data, or if we do have the authority to get the data, it is in such an inaccessible format that it's not realistic for us to be able to do meaningful analysis of that, to take a look at whether or not policies are being practiced the way that they ought to. And that is really concerning. And I want to be able to provide modern systems in order for us to do our jobs. But I also want to give you all as my peers opportunities to freshen up on our charter and our operating rules. And then we could have another conversation about a list that I have, and maybe you have others that wouldn't be on my personal list of things that need to change and things that this PCOC needs.
Yeah, any other commissioners have any anything they would like to add?
So are we thinking, and I totally agree, Vice Chair Pineau there. But are we thinking timeline wise, the actual conversation would be next meeting, or?
I'm not sure if it's within my capabilities as the current chair of the audit subcommittee, but this is something that the three of us, Jordan, and myself, are the audit subcommittee, and we're all here having this conversation. We could take a first swing at it and bring it back to this full commission, and maybe get Commissioner Sylvester in here as well. So I'll 5 of us would be able to take part in this conversation. I'd rather do it sooner than later. But as vice chair, and along with our new chair, I think it also would be important for us to start logistically having, meetings with city council members and staff about this in parallel with these conversations, to make sure that they're aware of this. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, we could hash things out right here, but I don't think people are, I know not everybody's brushed up on the operating rules and stuff like that. So I'd like to give you guys time to take a look at that. Is it possible, Madam Clerk, for us to convene a special meeting between now and our next regularly scheduled meeting?
I believe it is, as long as it's properly noticed. So.
And that's 48 or 2 business days? Right?
3 business days. We would need 3 business. It would need to be noticed 3 business days in advance.
Okay.
So we would need to have a date and an agenda in time for me to notice it 3 business days in advance.
Okay. If that would be, if timeliness is the concern from you, Commissioner Crockett, then that is an option, is a special meeting.
I was just trying to get an understanding of what we were thinking.
Oh, Commissioner Sparks has his hand up, so please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks. Would it be out of line to kind of start looking at that tonight? Maybe we could paint some broad strokes and revisit it later.
I think that's an appropriate part of this discussion, especially since we have our entire audit committee present. I'm hoping maybe you might have some good starting points to suggest. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess to kick things off there, and just to make sure the public and staff understand that when I say like limited staff resources, this is not a critique on staff, and we've tried to make that as clear as possible. In our audit subcommittee, we know that staff are doing the best that they can with the time that they have, and their time is spread thin. One concrete example, and one that I think is fairly crippling to our productivity, is the system by which data is processed through these complaints that are coming in, that from what I was told by Miss Amini, and I think if she wants to, she could provide more detail, but these complaints are all written out, handwritten out, and then digitized, but they're digitized in almost a picture format. None of it is in individual searchable and manipulatable fields. You can't look at any demographic information or any individual variables for us to then look up even basic summary data. It's part of a longer conversation that Andrew Hawkins has reported to us in the audit subcommittee, that they have been trying to reassess and get a new IT system up and running. And that is one of those issues that hopefully, from what I remember in audit subcommittee conversations, might be fixed in the near future. But it is the immediate one that comes to mind when we're talking about just getting basic information, about these complaints or about police practices. And it is stalled almost all of our work that has been referred to in the audit subcommittee. And in my opinion, that's the work that I find most interesting and fruitful in this entire endeavor. And I want to make sure that it is, it is practical for us to actually be pursuing that work in the audit subcommittee. So, I mean, that is a general sense in like the flow and modernization of, necessary information for us to be able to do our jobs. I could go on, but I don't want to hog the whole time up. If other members of the audit subcommittee have thoughts, would love to hear it.
Yeah, so Commissioner Pineau, I just want to say that I think you and I have a lot of the same thoughts. I just think you articulate them in a more palatable way than I do. So if you don't think of it as you taking up time, I think you're expressing what a lot of us are feeling.
I think we're beyond. I think we're beyond what tastes good in the palate at this point, but I appreciate it. I think another thing that I've mentioned before that we have great staff, but our staff have primary roles in other departments and other offices, and this is a issue of police oversight that is just so important to this city. Yet we don't have a single exclusive staff person to help assist us as an entity exclusively in this work. We are lucky enough that the Department of Civil Rights and OPCR are kind of shared within, nested similarly within the same portion of the ordinance, and because we are a volunteer commission within the Department of Civil Rights, we get to share some of those resources. But those resources have been cut in recent years, and they still have the same, if not more, responsibilities than they have had in previous years. And so that means less work that can be done towards the oversight of the Minneapolis Police Department from a civilian-centric lens. That's really concerning to me. I want to make sure that we're constantly fighting for that, because I think it's a shame that we only really have one individual who is, responsible for doing all of our audit and evaluation on top of his other duties. It's a burden, and I don't want that to be the case.
Yeah, that's really well stated, and as per usual. But I think it's true, and that's where a lot of frustration comes from. And again, I can't say it enough times, but it's not, that frustration that we feel is not directed at any individual who works for the city or for any of these departments, or even at the departments. It's just the whole system becomes so difficult. But if you look at like Department of Civil Rights, for example, like there are our partners in all of this, and some of the core responsibilities that we as a civilian commission rely on are people from civil rights filling the commission, helping make the appointees, keeping us full, performing the work, joining the meetings to provide updates, processing stipends when commissioners request them. And unfortunately, the department has struggled in all of those. The whole time I've been here, and I think that's the problem that precedes me. And I can only speculate as to the root cause, but I think it's like you say, it seems to come down to just lack of resources. We slide to the bottom of the totem pole pretty quick, and it's not a very high totem pole. There's just not a lot of bandwidth on these teams.
As a subcommittee, have you already identified directions that you think would be helpful for us to go, or discrete actions for us to take, or is that going to be one of our discussion points?
Hold on, let me cite my PCOC email here. In fact, I do have a letter from Andrew Hawkins regarding the IT and systems. I know Mr. Hawkins and I had intended to put together some sort of letter that would be communicated to the appropriate decision-making body to help support OPCR from PCOC's perspective in getting a new system. And that's one of those things of, you know, it bleeds into the other aspect of this is like, what is our authority? And I know that we've had tension in the past between members of this PCOC who believe they have a certain perspective on what our authority is, and we're getting advice from council that we have a different authority. I remember at one point, because we were in deadlock in those two differing opinions, we said, let's talk to city council. And if it is absolutely the case that council that, you know, Mr. Fussy is correct in his opinion, and we need to change it to be able to do our job, let's talk to council to get that authority. I never heard any result from that. But regardless, and I think that's a small example of this point of saying that it seems like, and you know, the elephant in the room is the Data Practices Act, right? It seems like we have this organically created assumption that we ought to have an authority here by the nature of our desire to have civilian oversight of police, yet certain interpretations of our authority leave us short of being able to realistically achieve what is organically assumed, if that's not too jargony. And there's clearly a discourse there. We need to find resolution between those two differing opinions, because that's just not going away. And we can either give up that organic opinion, and I think that will frankly only last as long as we are here. As soon as, you know, if we all resigned today and a new group came up, they will make the same assumption over again, and then this fight will continue. Or we need to come to a realistic way in which there can be some achieved oversight that that meets that organic assumption, that fits within the legal framework of what the city attorney's office is saying has to meet, you know, and exposing that for what it is and communicating it to the only entity that has the ability to do that, city council, seems to be, you know, a dramatic but the realistic way forward to meet that goal.
So I don't know if you've discussed this in subcommittee. I'm kind of hearing almost two steps. I mean, things that we've been doing de facto anyway, but so if we were to ask these questions of the city council, many of these questions would get referred to the city attorney for right to give the opinion. So I'm almost seeing that we need to, after our discussion of limited resources, I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I'm creating more work, but it's almost like we need to think of all these questions we need answered, and we need to document for future commissions, and we need answers from the city attorney first, because that is the official city position, in order to determine whether we're asking for something to be changed or not. Am I right? Or does that sound like the process? Yeah.
I would love to yield a portion of my time to Joel Fussy if he'd like to be part of the conversation here. And I know you know the types of conversations we've been talking about, and you've been gracious and patient with us to communicate you know the city attorney's office understanding of what our limits are, and you've been here longer than I have, and you've seen this natural progression. You know, is there a way that we can you know, start having a conversation about, you know, yes, we've been told what our limits are, but it's clear that we feel like there's a job left undone because of those limits. What would be the correct process by which we gain that authority in an appropriate way?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I guess I do have a couple thoughts on that. I would note one of the, obviously you're an advisory board and commission, and you have 10 enumerated areas of authority under the existing ordinance. I would note that one of them, the number 10, is to request from the mayor and city council the appointment of such staff as is necessary to carry out the duties of the commission. So that's something that's right there, that you have explicit authority to do so. So I would encourage you, if you have thoughts in that area, to take advantage of that area of authority. I would note, if we're just speaking, you know, circles around the issue of whether this commission has access to private personnel data, I would posit that we've spent probably every month that hasn't been canceled talking in one way or another about that issue. That's not that's a long settled issue. That's an issue that I think, as the clerk Casey Carl once said, I believe this commission just doesn't like the answer to. We've been explicitly clear. There are extensive memorandum from human resources attorneys in my office, and on various public records of various meetings over the past 2 years on that issue. That opinion is not going to change. It simply is not. So then the question is, do you want to expend resources looking at changing certain areas of the state statutes with regard to data privacy? Do you want to request that the city council initiate ordinance amendments, which is certainly within the authority, or things that you could do? But I think it is disingenuous to say that it's this issue that's been unresolved. It's been met squarely and repeatedly. And I think, quite frankly, the commission has been hung up on this, where staff and the city attorney's office has been crystal clear, literally for years, on this issue. And that's where we're at. I would direct you to the memorandum that are in the record on multiple months that address that issue in a crystal clear manner.
Yeah, and yes, I do apologize, Mr. Fussy. I don't mean to say that your position is unresolved. You guys have absolutely been crystal clear on that. I think the frustration, and you're right to a certain extent. Yeah, we don't like the answer. And personally, you know, I'm not going to speak for the whole commission. Personally, I feel a duty to look at certain trends of police practices and conducts that, by the standards, you know, by the decision, not decision, my apologies, by the nature of the data is defined as private, and it seems to be per your and the city attorney's opinion that that's outside our scope. And so I'm the discourse, you know, and lack of resolution is within our body. Is we feel like we have one end of saying, hey, you have this responsibility to look into this, and you know, you should be looking into, you know, important things that are happening with police information and get access. You know, you ought to get access to police data, and yet the rules are the case that you're not allowed. And that's, I hope that clarifies the discourse that I described. And I guess that part of what you just mentioned right there, the, use of resources to either amend ordinance or, effectively campaign for changes at the state level, are what you would say are the two avenues forward if, given that opinion that we have a mismatch between what our authority is and
Sure.
what we feel we're being charged with.
Sure, and I appreciate and understand that clarification. What I would say is that's one avenue, but I think the primary avenue out there, and I apologize because I try to avoid getting into policy recommendations. I don't view it necessarily as my role, but I will say, based on my experience on this commission over a number of years, I think you have a wide swath of authority, and the main area of authority you have is to review and audit summary and aggregate data regarding crime programs, research and study, patterns of behavior, and things along those lines. And I think a lot of changes can take place based on a research and study program into those sorts of areas. Past commissions were probably the first in the state to initiate a research and study program into body-worn cameras. That didn't rely upon individual private personnel data or private data. That relied upon summary and aggregate data to develop recommendations, which were almost in the whole adopted by the Minneapolis Police Department, and then I think later were fully adopted by the Minneapolis Police Department, and which paved the way for I think the state law that's out there now. So I think there's a wide area of authority that you have that, quite frankly, I think the commission has avoided over the past number of months. When there's fertile ground there, you have complete autonomy and authority to look into and to make recommendations, specific recommendations regarding any police policy. I think that can be based almost entirely upon data. And now I do believe you have a very good point in terms of, okay, what's the best way that we can get meaningful and useful summary aggregate data that's not private personnel data? That's certainly, I think, a ripe and fertile area. But I think with improvements made there, I just think that you're leaving a lot on the table in terms of the authority that you do have. And I'll be frank, in getting hung up on these areas of authority that you don't have.
I think that's fair. And I appreciate your perspective on, the difference between that individualized private data and the aggregate data. My only concern is that we do have instances where we're told categorically no, and I think that if that is the nature of this commission, that we just don't have responsibility to, or we don't have the authority. I would love to start having either a personal understanding or a pattern of practice in this commission of, this is off limits to you, as a commission, but it isn't off limits to other people. And trying to find a way to achieve those goals and get the information aggregated in some way that it is possible, is achievable. If the data is there, then someone's got to be able to do that work, right? Even if we're just asking for the appropriate person to do that work. That to me is better than just, the reason why we're getting stuck on it personally is because I feel like I'm just hearing, nope, don't even ask. And I want everyone to be working together to, hear an interesting question and find the appropriate avenue to find an answer to that interesting question. Is that fair? And not to, put you on the spot. I could generally say that to the group. That at the end of the day, that's what I want. I want us to collectively as a city find the appropriate path for important questions to be answered.
I thank you, as always, Vice Chair Pineau. I think it's very well put, and thank you, Attorney Fussy. I know it is frustrating that we do seem to keep going round on this, and I've said this before, and I think frustrating on everyone's part is that we're a volunteer commission that gets new members every 2 years, so it does feel like we're kind of behind the learning curve and trying to catch up, and that is one reason why we're asking these questions. But I also appreciate going through them again and again, because sometimes our questions can slightly differ, and I want to have maybe a goal moving forward is, well, trying to document the reasons better. So even if we're not getting, much progress under what our current authority is that whoever steps in after us will hopefully not have to go through that process again. Oh. Commissioners, any other discussion points or thoughts moving forward?
I guess, to that point, well, how do we as a commission want to have our next steps in documenting these concerns appropriately? And making sure that, we aren't just having the same meeting next month that sounds just like this one, Do we want to have it be, do we want to go as extreme of setting up a special meeting to document this all down? Has someone been taking notes and want to draft up a draft letter of some sort? Are there things that are left unsaid and we need more time to digest this and then come back to the table again with more and different information on these concerns? Those are the questions that I have.
My initial thoughts is it's worthwhile for all of us to take time to review the ordinances and maybe bring back into the record. I know we have them in past meeting agendas, but I do recall some of the opinions that Attorney Fussy was discussing is I think we need to, I don't know that we've had a discussion of all of that together at one time, right? So we have questions that we want answered or to discuss more between us. So I don't know if you all would like to do that in a special meeting or at the next one, but I think we prepare some sort of packet that we're all reviewing. Commissioner Sparks, please go ahead.
I'd be more of a fan of doing it in a special meeting.
Okay.
If I could speak frankly, I'm getting a little tired of coming every month, and it's like Commissioner Pineau says, we're kind of having the same meeting, and lately they're starting to feel really the same. And there's a month that goes on between them, where essentially little to nothing is happening. I think we have the opportunity to have one or maybe more. Maybe we have more than one. But the special meetings where we can tackle this more quickly and still give ourselves a little time to research and think and breathe could be effective. So I'd be a fan of that approach personally.
Commissioners Pineau and Crockett, do you have any other thoughts on how to proceed?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Commissioner Sparks. It'd be great to do a special meeting and focus on the ordinances and have that discussion.
Well, I think that's clear. Thank you both. That perhaps the special meeting will be helpful. Any other issues that you all wanted to discuss? Hearing nothing, I did want to discuss, because we haven't really had the opportunity to discuss case summaries this year. So I would like all your opinions on how we want to go forward with this. Do we want to dedicate perhaps a good chunk of time going over various months? I don't, stepping into this role today, I don't have this well thought out. Just that I think we do have a lot of case summaries that we do need to review in some fashion. And also, I am sorry to call OPCR back in, but I only see January and February, so I'm wondering if I'm the only one that sees that, or if we will be anticipating that multiple months will be available within the next month before our next meeting.
I see, looking at the link that I'm putting in chat,
Okay.
I see 4 months.
Okay.
January, February, March, April.
Thank you. That must be something on my end.
Yeah, I see 4 months as well.
Okay.
Previously, I don't remember seeing 4 months. The last time I looked at this, whenever it was, I thought it seemed like maybe it wasn't up to date. So maybe it's like cached on your end in a weird way or something.
I think you're right, because the link came up with just 2 months for me, so that might be a me problem. However, we haven't really had a discussion today. We haven't really had a discussion of case summaries this year. I don't quite have a good proposal right now thought through of how we want to address this. Does anyone have any initial thoughts?
I can kind of give my recollection of case summaries and how the nature of the conversations went beforehand, if that would be helpful.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So remember, there was an old version, which I'm not even going to try to describe, but essentially, PCOC was shown a series of, snippets, if you will. And even just if it was, 2 sentences worth of a description of a certain complaint. And those were 10 of them. We were asked as a group to pick 3, I believe. And then case summaries would be created from that, which were similar to the case summaries that we have here. And at this point in time in the process, we would have someone from OPCR walk us through each of those case summaries. And then we would have, roughly about 5 to 10 minutes of kind of question and answer to see if we could pull out quirks, inconsistencies, differences between policy and practice where we might want to dig in a little bit more and try to understand, is this something systemic? Was this an isolated case? A very first instance when I remember seeing these in person, we were talking about, I can't remember what the exact case was, but it ended up coming to, pass the idea that police officers sometimes miss when they're, required to go to court and, present, their role in a court proceeding, right? Or that they were going to be in the audience in some way and observing what was going on because they're related to the case in some way, and they either were there or not there. And that sort of inconsistency of being present or not being present was of interest to one of the commissioners, and we asked if someone could dig into it, or things like the frequency of bicycle related incidents which was a question that I had like 2 years ago, just being like, why do we care about bicycle related incidents? And kind of it was much more of an academic discussion of saying, well, if the rates of bicycle related incidents are a concern for you, you can ask about it, you know? Kind of a more, you know, take a inquisitive, curious approach to these. And that sort of like, you know, natural spark, that natural curiosity, I think lends itself to these. So I mean, if we are going into these case summaries, maybe it would be best if Ms. Amini could walk us through these and kind of familiarize ourselves with the new format.
I'm gonna keep my camera off because my computer seems to be freezing. So if I understood you right, Vice Chair, you want me to walk how our new process is going?
No, I think what I was kind of asking if you would mind kind of just talking us through each of the case summaries, and if to the extent that you are able to answer any questions that we might have regarding any, you know, specific one of the summaries, so that way we can get a better understanding of for ourselves about what happened in each of these instances.
Okay, so there's about 20 case summaries on here.
I was thinking
Which
like only
one
this most recent month.
specifically?
Yeah. I mean,
And
we
I
have the
believe-
5
oh,
for
I'm
April.
sorry.
We have the 5 for April that are here. You know, do we want to just walk through these one by one? And that is how we used to do it. And I don't, you know, want to presume that that's the way we have to continue to do it. But that's old dog, old trick, I guess.
Okay. Yes,
I'm so-
I can walk through the April ones if.
Miss Amini, before you proceed, I'm sorry, Joel Fussy had his hand up, but then it just came down, so I don't know if that was an accident.
No, I did want to pop in just to remind the commission that you did approve the new process just a number of months ago, which involved an amendment to your rules. So I think I think we've been over this territory. The old process was specifically amended by majority vote of this commission, and a new process was adopted.
Thank you. I realized that it was more, I want to touch on this because we've also had lack of quorum and other issues, so we kind of have some unvisited case summaries, and I do appreciate everyone reminding me of what we have, where we're at. And so, Ms. Amini, if you are amenable to it, I think it is helpful to go through the cases in the meeting in a deliberate fashion. But before we have you do that, the commissioners, do you have any other thoughts? Okay, hearing nothing, Ms. Amini, if you would be so kind.
Sure, absolutely. So I will start with the case summary number 21-16, which is the first one in April. Does the public
Chair.
know where to find this? I guess I should start off by asking.
I also have a question, Chair McGuire and Ms. Amini. Would you like me to display the case summary as you're discussing it?
Yes, I think that would be helpful unless anyone has objections to that.
I think that's a good idea. Good for especially the public, the viewing public who might be watching this later.
Okay, so I will start with the first one, like I mentioned, 21-16. This is a complaint that came in internally. Through the Minneapolis Police Department's public information officer had received an email from an external source alleging that an officer was using their social media platforms, and specifically one post had called for, quote, looting of Riverside Plaza, arresting journalists, looting women, end quote. That email then further included other images, screenshots of that officer's public Facebook page, and then an article was subsequently published that day or within a few hours the following day. So the case came into OPCR. Our intake investigators reviewed it. And if you were to scroll down for the summary of the investigation, because it came from a social media post, we don't necessarily have a VisiNet or a police report because it did not result in a call for service. So there isn't a police, like what we call a CCN or a police report number for that. But what we were able to use was the complainant statements, the screenshots that I had mentioned from that officer's Facebook page, and any other documents that we had used to properly identify that officer. And this in the second portion, again, because it was not a CCN or a call for service, we don't have body-worn camera, and there wasn't any existing squad video, or what we call MVR, the mobile video recorder. So the intake investigator reviews this case, adds all those documents into our program, which is Practice Manager, and then presents it to joint supervisors. Joint supervisors reviewed the case during intake, and then they decided that it should be routed to an administrative investigation. The case is then assigned to a sworn investigator who did the admin report. They had used the complainant statements, statements from the focus officer, and the additional evidence, like I had mentioned, the news article, the Facebook posts. And then an administrative report was completed and then forwarded to panel. The review panel found merit on the three allegations that were tied to this case, which was 5-102 Code of Ethics, 5-105 C2, which is a professional code of conduct. And then the review panel also found merit on the last one, which is the social media policy, 7-119481. So the review panel reviews it, and then it goes up to what we call the front office or the chief's office. But before the chief was able to impose any discipline, that officer actually separated from the department. So if you look at the first page, that's why it says at the MPD outcome that there was no discipline issue, because the officer had separated from the department before anything was imposed. But the PCRP, the Police Conduct Review Panel, did find merit on all three allegations. Does anyone have any questions in regards to this case?
I do have a question. I have two, in fact. First being, Ms. Amini, I've never seen a social, a use of the social networking policy before. Is this, common, or is this an uncommon instance as far as like looking through these case summaries? And then the second is, you said this originated internally, these are internal allegations. Is there a difference in timeliness between an internal allegation and a allegation that is filed by a member, a civilian member of the city?
That's an excellent question, and I'm glad that you asked that. No, there is no difference. When a civilian, for example, does a complaint form online, it goes to the same bucket as when a complaint internally comes in. There are two ways of how we can get information is one through that online portal or the police review inbox. And then it kind of varies on what is being used most often, but we look at both of those avenues every morning, and all those cases that we get through those two avenues are put in that same day. And there is no priority within OPCR to do one or the other before the other one. So it is just a matter of availability and when we can go down that line or that list, and get those through the joint supervisors. And to answer your first question, no, this does not happen. At least OPCR is not aware of so many instances that involves social media policy violations within MPD. It doesn't happen as frequently as say other violations like a BWC or a code of conduct, for example.
Any sense of whether or not it's growing in frequency? I mean, I know this is compared to other policies relatively new, but yeah, have you seen this coming up more often, or is it still kind of like rare?
Yes, that policy is pretty new. It's a few years old, but it kind of of course, this is me speaking without looking at any concrete data as to the regularity. But from what I've seen in my time in intake, I don't believe it has increased or decreased. It's just relatively stayed the same in the amounts of cases that we kind of get for the specific policy violation.
Okay, thanks. Those are all my questions.
Commissioner Sparks, please go ahead.
Thanks. I had a question about the employee separation. So I understand that this is the department no longer pursues discipline when an employee separates. I was having trouble remembering if that was strictly like a department policy or if that was something that was applicable under state law. Like, is that common in the state, or how big is the probably not using the right word, but how big is the jurisdiction for that? I'm sure we've discussed that before, but I could use a reminder if anybody knows.
Well, if, for example, if an officer leaves for whatever reason, there are many reasons why an officer would leave MPD, but if they were to come back to MPD as an officer, any previous like kind of pending cases, like for example this, could affect their rehiring as an officer. But I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not entirely sure how this would affect on a state level. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I guess maybe what I'm getting at is like, so an officer who, let's say there's a complaint and then there's merit to the complaint, they can in theory, resign their position, but they could, in theory, be hired back at a later time, or they could be hired by another department in the state or in another state, and maybe in that instance, the issue may not follow them there.
Potentially, yes. I guess it depends on the other agency doing their due diligence and checking any histories. If again, their police departments vary greatly, right, on what is disclosed. So I would depend on if they do apply for a different agency, if that agency checks.
Where do they check? Do they reach out to you to check? Is there a database? Do you know how that's handled?
It's not through us. It's not through OPCR. That would be a good question for records department. It might be them, but I can't say for sure.
Thank you. But I had a quick question about the watermark. I know it says draft example only. Is that because we haven't formally accepted this new process yet?
No, in fact, to be honest, that should not be there.
Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. That was my only question. Thank you.
I do have a follow-up question, if it's not too bothersome. What do you know if we switched that same question that Commissioner Sparks had around when we are hiring officers who have previous police experience in other jurisdictions, who would be the one asking, and to what extent that they're asking for whether or not there are previous infractions of their respective policies.
Well, it's not OPCR. MPD has their own kind of mini HR team. That would be a good question to ask them.
Okay.
We have never been involved in the hiring process of any MPD officer that I'm aware of, at least in my tenure at working with the Office of Police Conduct Review.
Cool. I mean, that's I think you stumbled on a really interesting question. I think Commissioner Sparks, this idea of past infringement at different jurisdictions, or different places of business for police officers.
Yeah, maybe it's something we can discuss with someone from MPD in a future meeting. The hiring practices and so forth. That can make for a really good topic.
Going off of your questions, I think, sorry, Ms. Amini, this might not be, you might not be the appropriate person, but do we have any examples that we can talk about of someone in this situation who later gets rehired by the MPD?
I don't believe I'm aware of any. Again, that would be a great question for whoever is responsible for the hiring of recruits or rehiring of an officer. I really don't know.
Thank you so much, Commissioners. Any further questions about this case summary that's in front of us? Okay. Hearing none, Ms. Amini, will you please move on to the next one? Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So the next one is 21-17. So this is a complaint of that came from a civilian, where the civilian was trying to pull up to her home, and she was driving on 17th Avenue and 28th Street when she realized that a part of the road was closed except for residents that lived in the area. She pulled through 27th Street. An officer had walked up to her window, and per the complaint, she stated that the officer started yelling at her and told her that she couldn't be there. The complainant then alleged that officer, or she had informed that officer that she does in fact live there. And by the way that the conversation went with the officer, she felt like the officer treated her as, quote, a moron. And she then noticed that her other neighbors had attempted to also go through the same intersection a few minutes later. So again, intake sees this in their queue. They open the case and start investigating. Her complaint did not include an officer's name or badge number. So what generally, when we get a complaint like this, we have to kind of start from scratch. So in the way that we do this is that we have the VisiNet, which is like a CAD call, which is generated by dispatch. So we try and look at all those CAD calls for the day and see if there was a call for service in that intersection. In this particular case, we didn't see one. So we then decided to, okay, well, let's look at every single police report that was generated that day. Because she doesn't, in the complaint, describe if it was like a road closure due to construction, or if it's a road closure due to an accident, for example. So we look at everything that was created that day by every officer within that precinct. We could not find anything within that intersection. So our next step is, well, let's look at workforce director, which is basically like a staffing calendar that MPD uses. So then we see, okay, well, these were all of the officers that were working that day through mid shift and day shift. By doing that, we are then able to track what squads were assigned to what officer and where were those squads that day. So we could not find a squad that was parked or had traveled through that intersection at the time that she had placed in the complaint. And then lastly, after going through all of that, we still have to check if there were any body-worn camera activations. If the interaction that she had described, that officer should have turned on their body-worn camera. So we checked all of those officers that were listed in Workforce Director, all of those officers that had responded to calls for service for that day. So the VisiNet information, the Workforce Director information, and going through every officer and seeing if they had turned on their camera to hopefully see if they capture that interaction. We didn't see anything. So with all of that in mind, we realized that there is no CCN, or excuse me, police report number. There is no body-worn camera. The only thing that we have is the initial complaint statement. So the intake team then goes and presents that information to the joint supervisors. Joint supervisors review all the work that they have done, and throughout the course of that conversation, they realized that an officer could not be identified through the normal process. So then the case was decided at the joint supervisors that it would be closed dismissed. I should specify, it's closed dismissed because we could not identify an MPD officer, to be specific.
Commissioners, I didn't see who had their hand up first, so whoever would like to, please ask
Go.
a question.
Go for it, Commissioner Crockett.
Commissioner Crockett, you're muted. I'm sorry.
All right, cool. Can you hear me? This one's interesting because there's demographics attached to it. Is for the demographics, is that the officer or is that the complainant?
Those are the self-reported demographics that the complainant provides in each complaint form.
Oh, gotcha. I didn't see in the last one. Okay, cool. That's essentially what I was looking to know. And then it was just non-conclusive, so there's just no conclusion to this one that or got thrown out essentially.
Right, because we through our extensive process, we were still unable to identify an MPD officer, and the previous complaint, the previous case summary, didn't have demographics because it was an internal complaint
Oh, okay.
from the PIO.
Thanks.
And Commissioner Pineau, or Vice Chair Pineau, before you ask your question, I wanted to ask, the demographics for race are in quotes, but they're not in other ones that I've seen. Is that because it's it's not a list or a drop-down menu? Is that
Right, she typed
However.
it in.
great?
Right.
Thank you. Vice Chair Pineau.
There's a way in which you phrased report that made me think about, okay, so there's the rule for body worn camera. Anytime you have an interaction, right, you got to turn it on. That's the policy. Is there a minimum threshold for an officer to write a report? I imagine if they're called to the scene, they're already thinking in their head, I got to write this down sometime later in the future, right? But this to me sounds like it was by happenstance, person was driving in an area where she, felt she could go, the officer felt otherwise, they interacted, right? Is there a minimum threshold from the officer's perspective to write a report? Does that even make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. And
Mhm.
it would be 4-601 or 4-602 within the PMP. It gives specific guidelines of when you should write a report. And that doesn't always necessarily coincide with when an officer needs to activate their BWC. So specifically, the BWC policy is more expansive in a sense where if you have an interaction with a civilian that doesn't include, directions or any kind of help around the city in terms of, where do I go, kind of stuff like that, you should turn on your body worn camera. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every interaction that you have with a civilian does not mean that you have to write a report.
Okay. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm looking at the report responsibility in the manual right now. I appreciate that. Okay. Yeah, that's the only question I have.
Any further questions, commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Amini, could you please proceed to the next one?
Absolutely. The next one is 21-18. So the complaint came in, this is also another external complaint from a civilian, where an officer was, quote, aggressive and put a knee on their neck and trying to pin their face on the ground after being cuffed, and said that too much force after being cuffed. That was the summary of that individual's complaint. So of course, intake receives it, pulls up the VisiNet and the police report. And the VisiNet had opened up as the problem. So when we state problem, it's how is the VisiNet categorized? So it was originally categorized as on-site, meaning that there was someone on-site at that location that had generated a call for service. The call type was then updated to a suspicious person and then reclassified as an officer needs help call. So the call log indicates that there was just one officer that arrived on scene at 7:51 p.m. and responded alone. So that's what they like to call when an officer is writing able, meaning he's the only person in that squad. He does not have a partner. A second squad was en route to assist, but then it was canceled at 7:52. 2 minutes later, there was a call to assist that initial responding officer, and requested that additional squads arrive at the scene, which they do a few minutes later. So in the police report that was then generated after this incident, had mentioned, and of course this is the public section of the report, where there was an officer that was flagged down by a security officer working at a liquor store, requested that an individual be trespassed. The officer responds to that and states that the individual that was there didn't want to cooperate with the trespass notice process and then became uncooperative with the officer. The individual was placed under arrest and then booked at Hennepin County Jail for obstruction. And then the other corroborating information was the initial complaint statements, and then, of course, the BWC. So if you look here at the BWC footage, that initial officer did have his body-worn camera on and had activated it appropriately, and we were able to see the entire incident. So the responding officer captures that interaction. Officer arrives at the scene alone, like I had mentioned before, and walks to the entrance of the liquor store where the complainant is standing outside of the store, talking to that third-party security. The security person then says that they would like to trespass that complainant and said that he needs to go. The officer grabs the complainant's arm and begins trying to cuff the complainant. The officer initially does not issue any commands to the complainant, nor does he state why he's attempting to detain or arrest them. A struggle between the two commences. The complainant is then taken to the ground by the officer and that third-party individual. And then the complainant begins to yell that he can't breathe. Officer can be seen moving his knee from the complainant's head, neck area to between the complainant's shoulders. The complainant is then cuffed. Officer briefly removes their knee to use his radio, and then he replaces it. And then the complainant states that he cannot breathe several more times, and the bystanders around that liquor store then start recording. The officer turns the complainant onto his side with their knees still on the complainant's back. And then during the struggle, the complainant's elbow is bleeding. That's when the secondary officers start arriving, and the complainant is then moved in the direction of the squad. And then there's another conversation that ensues between that primary officer and the complainant, where he's stating that he didn't do anything wrong and asks why the officer is so aggressive. And then the complainant is then secured in the squad and then taken to Hennepin County Jail. So in viewing all of that, it is then provided to intake. The joint supervisors then agree that the complaint warranted an admin investigation, and then a sworn investigator is then assigned. And then much like the other process, they go through all the relevant evidence, the complaint, they interview the complainant, interview the focus officer, all of the additional evidence, the body-worn camera, the police reports, etc., draft the admin report, and then send it to panel. The panel comes back where they found no merit for the allegation of 5-303, which is the use of force. The chief agreed with the decision from the review panel, and the focus officer was exonerated.
Commissioners, do you have any questions about this case summary?
I do. Just from the instance, and I know, our purpose here is to look at trends and kind of use this as, a sample to try to expand out onto. So I'm going to try to do that rather than dig into, what's going on with this case in particular. Something does kind of stand out to me, the phrase, in the middle of the body-worn camera paragraph, the complainant begins to yell, "Cannot breathe," and the officer can be seen moving their knee from the complainant's head/neck to between the complainant's shoulders. That's implying that the officer's knee was on the complainant's head and neck, and obviously that brings cause for concern. And I know that, you know, we've implemented changes in policy in recent years that prohibits neck restraints. And I remember within that being, you know, not allowing any pressure to the neck, throat, or windpipe is what I'm seeing here. And sorry, I'm trying to dig through the policy manual. It's in section K of, I think, 5-300, use of force. And I guess to, you know, turn this into a trends question, is seeing that, and, you know, I believe you're the person who wrote this up, Ms. Amini, right? The body worn camera review paragraph. So like those are your words.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It is, since the, you know, in the past 2 years, have you seen a noticeable change in the use of force around head and neck of people who are being detained? Is it, you know, I don't want to get your opinion on it. It seems a surprise to me that phrase is in there, and that it wasn't just your eyes noticing it, but it was the other, you know, other people who were looking at that body worn camera footage I assume saw the same thing that you saw, yet the outcome is that there's no merit, you know? So I guess just generally the trend of use of force around the head and neck area.
Sure. Well, to be frank, the statement is in there because that is what happened. So that's why it's included in the case summary. But to broadly answer that question, instances like this, and again, I'm only speaking from my own experience with OPCR. This is not something that happens that we have seen in the complaints that come into OPCR. Not something that happens often. Specifically with where the officer had placed their body on the complainant or a suspect or anyone. I personally have not seen that type of body position during intake or doing any kind of investigation.
Yeah, I can't think of any other question that doesn't go into critique the outcome, and that is not the purpose of our responsibility here. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm just I'll just say as a statement, I'm surprised that, you know, the fact is that the individual officer here, you know, put their knee on someone's head / neck. Luckily and thankfully removed it to between shoulders. But yeah, troubling to see.
And I also want to make it well known to anyone within the public who may not realize this. The Office of Police Conduct Review do not offer an opinion of merit, and we have no input as to whether an officer is disciplined after a review panel issues their recommendation.
Thank you for mentioning. That's fair. Yeah, I have no further questions. It's just something that inconsistency between what was reported and then the known policy and then the lack of, you know, upon discovery shouldn't that have been brought up? Because that is the case in other instances, right? Like if, upon hearing about one complaint, if there's a discovery of, in a body worn camera footage, you hear the officer swearing at someone, then it has been the case in the past that, a discovering a policy violation has occurred, then an officer could then potentially be disciplined for that, even though it wasn't the original intent for looking at body worn camera footage or anything else. Am I right in that assumption, or?
Yes, yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. I have no questions.
I also have a question that maybe we'll need to look more into and for trends is maybe you haven't seen this exact type of force used, but I'm trying to think, have you seen this maybe comparable levels of force? And when there has been comparable levels of force, what is the alleged criminal conduct? So here it's trespassing, and it looks like the person was ultimately booked for obstruction of justice, which tend to be misdemeanor offenses rather than felony offenses. Are you able to speak to any sort of correlation between force I know that's not a very quantifiable term, a level of force used and alleged criminal conduct?
I wouldn't be able to answer that without looking at the data.
Okay, then that might be something we need to be looking at too. Just wondering if you had any idea. Okay. Commissioners, in the interest of time, because we are 8:05 and we do have a couple points left on the agenda, I'm wondering if we could move to save the next two case summaries for next meeting, next month. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm fine if we just get into the habit of, now that we know where they are and they're updated, we could skim them beforehand. And I think that was
Right.
the original intent of all of this. And I appreciate Ms. Amini for entertaining us on the old ways for a night.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amini, for being called on again and again.
Absolutely, anytime.
Okay. I would also, Ms. Brock, can you please let me know how to address this? I would like to table my discussion of the Minnesota Division of Driver and Vehicle Services discussion, just in the interest of time.
Yeah, that would be at your discretion, Chair McGuire, to postpone that to the next meeting.
Okay, I would like to postpone that to the next meeting in case we want to have time to discuss that. So.
And that does not require a vote.
Okay, thank you. Then the next order of business is I will recognize Vice Chair Pineau to give the Audit Subcommittee report.
Yeah. So a good, summary I've already kind of given of what our main frustrations were in the report, in the audit subcommittee itself, that we kind of initially brought up in the first part of the conversation. I will kind of give, the line by line for our major items of business. No-knock warrants. I'm waiting on Christopher Band to come back. He had some personal time. Him and I are going to look at some of the data that he's used to see if we can pull together some kind of rudimentary analysis of looking at relationships between some of the variables between announced entry, unannounced entry, and some of the outcomes related to that. regarding coaching, that's one of those areas where, we don't have a new data management system. So we've hit a really strong wall there, which was kind of the main reason why we prompted this conversation here today. And then a discipline research and study is one of the newer items that we were talking about. Ms. Amini was kind enough to give us a breakdown of what's private and what's public data points that are related to discipline, allowed us to have a little bit more insight there. And we discussed the potential of engaging with the records department, which sounds like a common trend, which we might do for multiple issues now. And we intend in our next meeting to talk with Mr. Band again on the issue of discipline research and study to see with the current types of reporting that we have available now, is it realistic for him to go through and kind of visually eyeball each of the variables and manually put together a spreadsheet, or do we have to wait for a different, more up-to-date management system to be able to do the type of interesting work that we're interested in? That's a more detailed version of our report.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion on this report? Okay, hearing none. And without objection, I will direct the clerk to receive and file this report. Next, I generally would be when I would recognize myself or the vice chair to give a report. I would say that there is no report unless anyone has any questions or discussion on that point. Right. Hearing none, I will move on to the next order of business, is the acceptance of public comments. I will open the floor and invite comments from the community. We will limit the public comment period to no more than 2 minutes per speaker. And with that, are there any community members on the line who wish to address this commission? Just a reminder to please press *6 to unmute yourself. State your name please state your name for the record.
Hello, this is Dave Bicking. A couple of, I'll try to make them brief comments. I'm disappointed that now it appears that it's June at best, that there'll be the full commission, and hopefully by then fully trained in and ready to go. I appreciate that you had your discussion about the mission. I think that's very important. And I wish that discussion could be held and continued with a more full commission, but I think time is of the essence. Want to make a couple of notes about the mission, getting data. Now, I question whether you can get non-public data, but that's another example. But getting public data has been your big problem. And I've been thinking about that, and I wonder if it makes sense, instead of asking just informally, though you should, as or request it from staff, whether filing a data practice request as an individual or as a commission might not make sense, because that gets you any public data there is, and it also requires that public data to be provided, which doesn't seem to always happen with a request to the staff. It's not very timely in many cases, and it has the disadvantage of that most of the times you get raw data instead of the work that the staff often does that's very helpful to bring you summary or aggregate data. But that's something you could work out on your own. And then finally, the case summaries, I want to make a note that, first of all, they aren't attached to the agenda, so nobody knows necessarily where to look for those or which ones are being done this month. But it was referred to that they're on the website. And I've gone to that page on the website. It only has agendas for January and February up through OPCR-21-10. And you today were discussing 21-16 and onward. So the public is still being kept out of the information that's supposed to be there under the open meeting law. I think that needs to be changed and quickly. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bicking. Would anyone else like to does anyone else wish to address the commission? Not hearing any other comments. Thank you, Mr. Bicking, for your comments tonight. That is all our business for tonight. And seeing as we have no further business at this time and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.